It often begins not with a discovery, but with a pause, a moment when something familiar no longer fits the shape we expect it to, a stone that feels too smooth, a mechanism too precise, a story that refuses to stay neatly inside the margins of history books. Progress, we are told, moves forward in a straight line, from simple to complex, from crude tools to refined machines, from darkness into light. And yet, scattered across museums, private collections, and half-forgotten archives are objects that seem to whisper a different story. What if history is not a ladder but a shoreline, its traces erased and redrawn by time? For centuries, our understanding of the past has been guided by timelines. They help us make sense of chaos. They give comfort, order, and direction. We learn when fire was mastered, when wheels first turned, when metal yielded to human hands. But occasionally, something surfaces that does not belong where it is found. An object that appears too early, too advanced, too confident in a world we imagine as still learning how to stand. These moments are uncomfortable, not because they prove anything outright, but because they ask us to sit with uncertainty. In the quiet hills of Texas, a hammer once emerged from stone older than memory itself. In the depths of the Mediterranean, corroded bronze gears hinted at a mind thinking in ratios and cycles long before clocks learned to tick. In deserts, mountains, and riverbanks, fragments of craftsmanship surfaced that seemed to know more than their age should allow. Each discovery carried a similar tension, not between truth and falsehood, but between explanation and imagination. History, after all, is not just a record of what happened. It is a story we agree to tell. Archaeology is careful by necessity. Science advances through skepticism. And yet, when anomalies appear, they test the balance between caution and curiosity. Some are eventually explained. Others dissolve under scrutiny. But a few remain suspended, neither confirmed nor fully dismissed. They linger in footnotes, in quiet debates, in the private doubts of researchers who wonder whether absence of evidence is sometimes mistaken for evidence of absence. This is not a journey into certainty. It is an invitation into reflection. Because the most profound question these objects raise is not whether ancient people had technologies we do not expect, but why we expect the past to be simpler than ourselves. We often imagine our ancestors as waiting for knowledge to arrive, rather than actively shaping, losing, and rediscovering it. Yet human history is filled with cycles of brilliance and collapse. Libraries burned, cities abandoned, skills forgotten. Civilizations rose, fractured, and faded, leaving only partial echoes behind. Memory is fragile. Stone endures, but meaning does not. When we encounter artifacts that seem to contradict the official rhythm of progress, we are faced with a choice. We can force them into existing narratives, or we can allow them to remain questions, symbols of how incomplete our understanding truly is. Not every mystery needs a dramatic explanation. Sometimes the quietest answer is the most honest. We do not yet know. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. These objects, real, debated, misunderstood, do not demand that we rewrite history overnight. They ask something gentler and more difficult. To loosen our grip on certainty. To accept that human ingenuity may have flickered in places and times, now lost to erosion and silence. To recognize that knowledge is not guaranteed to move forward, only to move. As we begin this journey, we will not chase shock or revelation for its own sake. We will listen, we will observe, and we will reflect on what these anomalies reveal, not just about the past, but about our need for order, continuity, and meaning. Because in the end, the greatest mystery may not be how advanced our ancestors were, it may be how much we have forgotten. It began in Texas with a stone cracked open by curiosity. In 1936, Max and Emma Hahn were walking near a creek bed close to London, Texas, when they noticed a strange chunk of rock with a piece of wood protruding from it. They brought it home, unaware that they were holding something that would perplex geologists and metallurgists for decades. When the stone was eventually broken open, it revealed a hammer, its wooden handle partially fossilized, its iron head encased in ancient stone. This was no ordinary rock. Geologists who examined the formation surrounding the hammer estimated it to be over 400 million years old. That alone would have been enough to draw eyebrows, but what was more unsettling was the hammer itself. The iron head was 96.6% pure, with traces of sulfur and chlorine, an alloy that doesn't occur naturally and requires smelting processes far beyond what even the earliest known civilizations had achieved. And yet here it was, quietly defying timelines. The hammer showed no signs of rust, as if it had somehow been preserved beyond the reach of time's decay. Its metal structure exhibited characteristics that modern metallurgical science struggled to replicate, suggesting a crystalline formation unlike any known industrial process. Even under modern scrutiny, the craftsmanship challenged assumptions. Was it the result of a natural oddity, a modern intrusion somehow embedded into ancient strata? Or was it something more, an echo from a chapter of history we no longer remember? For decades, the artifact was kept in the private hands of the Hahn family. Occasional tests were conducted, each adding new layers of strangeness to its already puzzling story. In 1983, metallurgist Carl Baugh analyzed the hammerhead and confirmed what others had quietly suspected. This was a manufactured object with properties that should not exist in the context of the rock encasing it. Attempts to publish findings met silence, or worse, rejection. Mainstream institutions dismissed the hammer as a curiosity, perhaps a hoax or a misinterpretation of natural phenomena. The idea that a tool resembling modern construction could be millions of years old was, to many, simply unacceptable. Not because the data didn't exist, but because the implications were too profound. If it were true, it would mean that either our understanding of geological processes is flawed, or that advanced metallurgy once existed in a forgotten epoch of Earth's past. Either way, it pointed to a story far larger than one object. The hammer, still in private collection, has become a symbol, not of conspiracy, but of the delicate balance between open inquiry and institutional reluctance. To accept it as genuine would require us to reconsider not just a single timeline, but the very architecture of technological history. And so the hammer remains, solid, silent, suspended between science and myth. What does it mean when something so simple, a tool, carries the weight of such profound implications? Perhaps it's a reminder that our ancestors, known and unknown, may have once held knowledge that flickered and vanished before we could record it. That time does not always carry progress forward, but sometimes buries it under layers of stone and forgetfulness. If a hammer can survive for hundreds of millions of years untouched by rust or explanation, what else might be waiting beneath our feet? And more importantly, are we still willing to look? Sometimes the most challenging truths arrive not in grand revelations, but in the ordinary made impossible. A hammer, a stone, a question that refuses to go away. The Aegean Sea, 1901. A storm had passed, leaving the waters calmer, clearer, revealing the remains of an ancient shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. Among the statues and amphorae retrieved by sponge divers was a lump of corroded bronze and wood, easily overlooked. At first, it seemed no more than debris, a relic without meaning. But as fragments were studied over time, a pattern emerged. Gears, dials, engraved inscriptions. Not just a tool, but a machine. What they had found would come to be known as the Antikythera Mechanism, and it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about ancient technology. Housed today in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, the device is a marvel of lost ingenuity. Dating to the 1st or 2nd century BCE, it was an analog computer capable of calculating the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. It could predict eclipses, track lunar phases, and even model the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. Over 30 precision-cut bronze gears, all working in harmony, nestled inside a box no larger than a shoebox. The craftsmanship was so intricate, the mathematical knowledge so advanced, that historians struggled to accept its authenticity. It was centuries, perhaps millennia, ahead of its time. Modern engineers attempting to recreate it found themselves humbled. The tolerances required for the gear teeth were so fine that they rivaled the precision of 18th century clockmakers. And yet, this device predated mechanical clocks by over 1,000 years. How could such knowledge arise in ancient Greece, then disappear without a trace? The Antikythera Mechanism was not magic. It was mathematics, astronomy, engineering, applied with a brilliance that challenged the linear story of progress. Its existence suggested not an isolated genius, but a culture capable of understanding celestial mechanics with a sophistication we had not attributed to them. No other device like it has ever been found. Some believe it was part of a broader tradition of mechanical astronomy, now lost to time. Others argue it was a singular masterpiece. But if this was the work of one mind, then that mind must have stood on the shoulders of countless others, building a lineage of knowledge we no longer remember. Academic institutions eventually acknowledged the mechanism's significance, but often with caveats. Museums speak of its mystery, but rarely of its implications. Textbooks mention it as an anomaly, not as evidence of a forgotten scientific revolution. But what if the real mystery isn't how it was made? What if it's why it was forgotten? Perhaps the mechanism's gears did not simply measure time, they were swallowed by it. Wars, plagues, collapses, and conquests have erased more than we can count. Libraries burn, traditions break. The chain of transmission is fragile. Genius, if not passed on, can vanish in a generation. The Antikythera Mechanism whispers to us through rust and ruin, not of alien technologies or impossible origins, but of human brilliance lost too soon. It is a testament to what we are capable of, and how easily such capabilities can slip into obscurity. If such knowledge existed then, what else might we have overlooked? And if history is written by what survives, how much of our story remains untold, scattered beneath the waves, waiting to be seen not as anomaly, but as legacy? In the arid ranges of the Coso Mountains, 1961, a trio of rock collectors searching for geodes stumbled upon something far stranger than crystals. What they found looked like a common stone, but when it was sliced open, it revealed something impossible. A metallic object at its core. Not just any metal, this was a spark plug. Intact, precise, and unmistakably modern. But the rock surrounding it had formed over 500,000 years ago. How does something invented in the 20th century end up locked inside a prehistoric stone? Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Jack Gillespie had not been searching for controversy. They were enthusiasts, curious about the Earth's hidden beauty. Yet the artifact they uncovered, now known as the Coso artifact, would become one of the most perplexing outliers in archaeological history. Geological dating placed the rock in the Pleistocene epoch, hundreds of thousands of years before the invention of the internal combustion engine. X-ray scans of the object revealed internal structures identical to those of a spark plug. A metal shaft, ceramic insulator, and even spring mechanisms. It was not simply an object that resembled modern technology, it was modern technology, only impossibly old. Initial disbelief was expected. A mistake in dating, a modern intrusion into ancient layers. But independent examinations confirmed that the rock had formed naturally around the object over vast timescales. No tool marks, no tampering. The artifact was embedded, not inserted. The artifact should have inspired rigorous investigation. Instead, it was dismissed. Scientific journals declined to publish findings. Universities refused further analysis. Museums passed on exhibiting it, citing controversy and doubts over authenticity. In time, the artifact vanished from the public eye. Its photographs and X-rays now the only remaining testimony. What is more troubling than the object itself is the pattern of avoidance it reveals. When anomalies arise that don't fit our frameworks, our instinct is not to explore but to contain, to protect the narrative, to safeguard the timeline. But science, at its best, asks questions, especially uncomfortable ones. And this spark plug in stone was nothing if not uncomfortable. Was it a hoax, an error, or a remnant of something we can't yet explain? Maybe we're not ready to entertain that question. Maybe we've trained ourselves to ignore what doesn't align. Or perhaps we fear what these anomalies might say, that technological knowledge has surfaced before, in epochs long erased. The Koso artifact, like others before and after it, sits in the gray space between fact and disbelief. Its existence cannot be disproven. Its implications remain unaccepted. But it forces us to confront a haunting possibility. The past may hold echoes of futures once lived and lost. Could entire chapters of innovation have risen and fallen before us? And if so, is progress a staircase we climb, or a wheel that turns again and again through time and forgetting? In the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, where writing was born and empires first rose from clay and stone, a jar once stood, quiet, unremarkable, and seemingly mundane. But in 1936, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König uncovered something startling near Baghdad. It was not just a jar. Inside were a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and an asphalt stopper. When combined with an acidic solution, it produced electricity. This wasn't a ritual object. It was a battery. The so-called Baghdad Battery defied expectations of what ancient civilizations were thought capable of. Koenig's find was quickly relegated to the fringes. Surely the experts reasoned he had misunderstood its purpose. Electricity, after all, was a modern marvel, a 19th-century invention. And yet, here it was, 2,000 years earlier. Further testing confirmed the battery's ability to generate up to 1.1 volts, enough to power small devices, stimulate muscle tissue, or electroplate metals. Evidence from the region included gold-plated artifacts that hinted at just such processes. The design of the batteries showed not only knowledge of electrical principles, but precision in execution. Deliberate choices to reduce corrosion, maximize efficiency, and contain reactive materials. And perhaps most telling of all, there wasn't just one. Multiple similar batteries were found, suggesting this wasn't a singular curiosity, but part of a practiced technology. Still, the mainstream response was muted. Museums labeled them as ritual objects or mysteries, placing them behind glass but away from explanation. Scientific institutions often declined to probe too deeply, insisting the interpretation was too speculative. The narrative of technological progress was too neat, too linear to make room for ancient vaults in clay jars. So the battery sat, present but unresolved. Why would Mesopotamian craftsmen have needed electricity? For lighting, electroplating, medical treatment? These uses remain speculative, yet none are beyond plausibility. What remains harder to accept is the idea that electricity wasn't discovered once, but rediscovered, its earlier incarnation forgotten, buried with the empires that once lit it. The Baghdad Battery hums with a quiet power, not just electrical, but symbolic. It challenges the way we define progress, and how easily we assume a clean break between ancient and modern. Perhaps the line is not so clear. Perhaps knowledge is not always cumulative, but cyclical. It appears, serves a need, then fades when the context crumbles, until someone, somewhere, rediscovers the spark. We're left with an image, a flicker of light in a Mesopotamian workshop, 2,000 years before Edison. A craftsman dipping metal into acid, watching as invisible currents bind one material to another. Not magic, not prophecy, just knowledge, held briefly, then lost. What else have we forgotten? And if electricity once lit the ancient world, what other forces might have danced in the hands of civilizations too far behind us to recall, yet too advanced to fully dismiss? In 1851, beneath the city streets of Dorchester, Massachusetts, a routine explosion tore through layers of rock on Meeting House Hill and exposed a mystery sealed for what appeared to be 100,000 years. Amid the debris lay a gleaming object, a bell-shaped metallic vessel, fractured by the blast but unmistakably crafted. Intricate floral inlays shimmered on its surface. Its walls were thin, precise. The alloy? Unknown. The design? Impossibly advanced for the time it was supposedly made. The Dorchester pot, as it came to be known, should not have existed. It emerged not from a tomb or a museum display, but from solid rock, 15 feet underground, in geological strata thought to predate any known human civilization. Those who examined it noted a level of craftsmanship beyond the 19th century. The pot's patterns were complex and symmetrical, likely requiring tools and techniques not attributed to ancient or prehistoric artisans. Newspapers of the time reported the find with fascination, and the Boston Society of Natural History briefly investigated. But when questions arose about what the artifact implied, about technology, about timelines, about everything we thought we knew, the story faded. The pot quietly disappeared from public view. No museum holds it today, no institution admits to its possession. What happened? Perhaps the more pressing question is, why do such objects so often vanish? It's tempting to leap to conspiracies, to hidden vaults and deliberate cover-ups, but the truth may be more human, more mundane, and more unsettling. Discomfort. When faced with objects that don't fit, that unmake centuries of scholarly consensus with a glint of metal, institutions often retreat, not necessarily from malice, but from inertia. The Dorchester pot doesn't scream its mystery. It whispers. Its surface suggests not a primitive mind, but a practiced artisan, the kind who works from templates passed down through generations, whose designs are guided by tradition, not experimentation. The presence of silver inlays and floral motifs implies not only artistic intent, but cultural meaning, values, aesthetics, perhaps even ritual. Who then made it? And what world did they live in 100,000 years before the first known cities? We may never know. The pot is gone. Its alloy remains unidentified. Its purpose, its context, lost. But the implications linger. If art this refined could exist so deep in geological time, what else might lie beneath the surface of our assumptions? What crafts, what cultures, what entire civilizations may have come and gone, leaving behind only fragments too strange to catalog, too rare to repeat? The Dorchester pot is not just an object. It is a mirror, showing us how little we truly understand of the depths beneath our feet, and how often we mistake the absence of records for the absence of history. Perhaps the story isn't that something advanced once existed. Perhaps the real story is that we forgot how to see it when it did. Deep beneath South Africa's earth, miners carving through layers of ancient stone stumbled upon something strange, something too perfect. They found spheres, dozens of them, smooth, metallic, with shallow grooves etched around their equators. Some were solid, others hollow. All were encased in Precambrian rock, geological formations dated to nearly 3 billion years ago. 3 billion. The so-called Klerksdorp Spheres were first dismissed as natural oddities, concretions, some said, minerals shaped by the slow currents of time and pressure. But these weren't random. Their surfaces bore symmetry, the grooves clean and consistent. Their centers revealed uniform density, and in some cases material composition unlike anything found in natural formations. Were they tools? Decorations? Components? The question hung unanswered. Geologists examined them, some reluctantly. Most avoided calling them artificial, preferring the safer harbor of uncertainty. Others quietly admitted what they couldn't explain. The shapes were too regular, the patterns too deliberate. One sphere even appeared to spin on its axis, resting in a display case, balanced so precisely it rotated in response to vibrations, like a miniature gyroscope in stone. If these objects were natural, they were unlike any known natural process, and yet the world did not stop. The spheres were placed in museum drawers, labeled mystery. Papers were written, then withdrawn. Official interpretations remained cautious, insisting on geological explanations, concretions, sedimentary artifacts, something mundane stretched thin over millennia. But the implications refused to fade. To suggest a man-made artifact in 3-billion-year-old rock is to challenge not only archaeology, but biology, chemistry, the entire scaffolding of our understanding of life on Earth. At that time, the planet was barren of complex organisms. No animals, no plants. Just simple microbes, drifting in a world slowly learning how to breathe. And yet, these spheres sat in the stone. If they are artificial, they should not exist. If they are natural, nature is more precise and more mysterious than we imagine. The Klerksdorp Spheres are neither weapon nor writing. They carry no message, no clear function, but their presence echoes. They remind us that the Earth is old beyond comprehension, that beneath every step we take lies a history we cannot fully excavate. They offer a quiet defiance, proof perhaps not of a lost civilization, but of the limitations of our perspective. Sometimes, in our pursuit of history, we look only for what we expect, but these spheres ask us to widen the frame, to imagine that time is not a single road leading to us, but a vast and ancient landscape pocked with forgotten trails, detours, and dead ends. What if we're not the first to shape metal, to dream in symmetry, to carve meaning into matter? And if something once moved through this world long before us, what traces did it leave behind that we have yet to recognize? In 1974, on the banks of the Mureș River in Romania, construction workers unearthed a mystery buried deep in the earth. Among the bones of mastodons, creatures extinct for tens of thousands of years, lay something that had no place among them, a wedge of metal, corroded and battered, but unmistakably manufactured. It became known as the Aeod wedge. At first glance, it appeared industrial, an object of practical use, possibly part of a mechanical assembly. But what unsettled researchers was its composition, an aluminum alloy containing copper and other elements. Aluminum, as we know it, is a product of modern science. It requires high-temperature electrolysis and was not isolated until the 19th century. And yet this wedge was found in a geological layer dated to 20,000 years ago. Aluminum is not found in nature in metallic form. It is locked in ores, demanding complex processes to release it. Even in our own timeline, its extraction marked a turning point in industrial history. That such an object existed, crafted from this metal, long before our ancestors had learned to forge iron, was not just puzzling. It was impossible. The wedge bore tool marks, including drilling and shaping inconsistent with stone tools. It was not an ornament. Its wear suggested mechanical function. Some theorized it could have been part of a landing mechanism, a hinge, or a structural support. But such speculation only deepened the rift between observation and acceptance. Romanian authorities initiated studies, but international institutions showed little interest. The artifact challenged too many assumptions. To acknowledge it would demand the rewriting of more than just a few pages. It would force a reckoning with the very foundations of technological chronology. So the wedge was marginalized. Some labeled it a hoax. Others suggested contamination, a misplaced modern object confused with older material, but geological surveys of the site upheld the dating. The bones, the soil layers, and the artifact all belong to the same ancient deposit. Eventually, the Ayyud wedge faded from public discourse. It now rests in a museum basement, far from display, accompanied by labels that explain nothing. But it remains real. Its quiet presence stirs a deeper question. How do we define the possible? Is it by the limits of current knowledge, or by the evidence we find, however inconvenient it may be? The wedge doesn't ask us to believe in aliens or rewrite the laws of physics. It asks only that we reconsider the possibility of forgotten chapters, of human hands, or perhaps other hands, crafting with knowledge lost to time. What if the past held moments of brilliance we've mistaken for silence? And what happens when a single piece of metal, buried among bones, reminds us that the earth may remember more than we do? In the desert plains near Ica, Peru, time sleeps beneath stone. Since the 1930s, thousands of carved andesite stones have surfaced, many unearthed by farmers and collectors, others hidden away in caves and dry riverbeds. They tell stories not found in any history book, scenes of humans coexisting with dinosaurs, of surgical operations performed with startling precision, of people using telescopes, flying machines, and complex instruments etched into volcanic rock. They are called the Ica stones. To some, they are fakes, curiosities sold to tourists. To others, they are artifacts, fragments of a memory too vast and inconvenient to accept. The stones vary in size, from palm-sized tokens to heavy slabs. But what unites them is their imagery. Carvings show organ transplants, brain surgeries, and heart procedures conducted with tools that resemble modern surgical instruments. Some depict astronomical alignments, star charts, and planetary events that would require not only observation, but computation. And then there are the creatures, dinosaurs long extinct, shown alongside human figures, riding, hunting, living with them. The anatomical accuracy of these depictions is unsettling. Many of the details, such as dermal spines along the backs of sauropods, weren't known to science when the stones first appeared. Paleontology would only confirm them decades later. Dr. Javier Cabrera, a respected Peruvian physician, collected over 15,000 of the stones, convinced they represented a forgotten civilization, one with medical, astronomical, and technological knowledge far beyond what we assign to ancient peoples. He dedicated his life to documenting the stones, even founding a private museum to house them. But his work, like the stones themselves, was dismissed. Mainstream archaeologists called them hoaxes. Modern fabrications aged with smoke and carved with steel tools. Yet independent examinations of some stones showed weathering consistent with great age and wear patterns on the engravings that suggested authentic erosion over centuries, if not millennia. Still, the consensus remained. They were too extraordinary to be believed, and so they were set aside. But perhaps belief is not the point. What the Ica stones offer is not definitive proof, but a challenge, a disruption of the neat narrative of linear human progress. They suggest that memory may stretch further back than record. That knowledge may have crested and collapsed in waves, each time leaving behind traces misread as myth or mistake. What civilization could have carved these stones? Were they symbols, teaching tools, records of myth or memory? And if they are hoaxes, why do so many display knowledge unknown at the time of their alleged creation? Why are some buried deep in unexcavated strata, far from human tampering? No one knows. But in their silence, the stones still speak. They ask whether we are willing to entertain the possibility that our ancestors, or some civilization we no longer remember, once reached for the stars, mapped the skies, healed the body, and walked alongside creatures we now only know from bone. And if that's true, or even partly true, then what exactly did we forget? Or more hauntingly, who were we before we became us? In the summer of 1889, on the outskirts of Nampa, Idaho, a group of workers drilling for water reached a depth of over 300 feet. As the drill brought up clay from deep below the surface, something astonishing emerged. A small figure, carved in clay. A woman. The figurine was delicate, no more than 1.5 inches tall. It bore clear human features, detailed, intentional, artistic. Yet the layer from which it came dated back over 2 million years. According to everything we know about human history, that was impossible. The Nampa figurine became a silent contradiction. At the time, humans were not thought to have existed in North America. Even more absurd was the idea that symbolic art, especially detailed sculpture, could have been created in such an ancient epoch. Symbolic thought, the ability to create art, to express ideas through form, is considered one of the final thresholds of modern humanity. It requires not just intelligence, but culture, time, and intention. And yet here she was, humble, still, and entirely out of place. Some believed it was a hoax. Others speculated the figurine had fallen into a crack or been dropped into the well at a later date. But no evidence supported intrusion. The drilling method used at the time brought up sealed layers of sediment, undisturbed for millennia. The clay from which the figure emerged had not been breached since long before humans were supposed to walk the earth. Initial excitement gave way to silence. Scientific societies mentioned the find, then moved on. Museums declined to acquire the artifact. Researchers avoided its implications. The figurine, like so many other anomalies, was relegated to the margins, carefully avoided, rarely examined. Why? Because to accept her would mean rewriting what we believe about the origins of art, of intelligence, of us. The leap from stone tools to symbolic representation is not a small one. It marks the beginning of abstract thought, of language, of memory carried in form. If someone created art 2 million years ago, they had stories, culture, imagination. And if one artist existed, there were surely others. The Nampa figurine invites us to reconsider the thresholds we use to define humanity. Perhaps we've drawn them too late. Perhaps what we call modern has deeper roots, winding back into forgotten time. She reminds us that art is not a luxury of civilization. It may be its seed. A small clay figure, carved with care and buried in silence, survived long enough to unsettle us. Not with grandeur, but with presence. Not with evidence of gods or machines, but with the quiet insistence that someone, long ago, knew how to shape meaning with their hands. We may never know who she was meant to represent. A deity, a woman, a myth, but she tells a story just by being here. And that story is this. Our beginnings may be older, deeper, and more creative than we dared to imagine. What if we were always more than survivors? What if we were, even then, storytellers? In 1976, in the volcanic ash fields of Laetoli, Tanzania, the Earth offered up a footprint. And then another, and another. A trail of 3 hominids walking upright across fresh ash that had hardened into stone. Preserved for 3.6 million years, these prints told a clear and stunning story. That bipedalism, the hallmark of modern humanity, stretched back far further than expected. Mary Leakey, the renowned paleoanthropologist who led the discovery, celebrated the find as groundbreaking. Here was proof that early human ancestors walked much like we do. But as researchers examined the impressions more closely, something peculiar emerged. The footprints weren't just upright. They were modern. They bore arches, heel strikes, toe-offs. Some displayed symmetry and spacing akin to that of contemporary humans, not early hominids. Even more startling, a few prints hinted at something even less expected. Impressions suggesting the presence of footwear. Subtle ridges, uniform edges, shapes not typically formed by bare feet in soft ash. How could this be? Modern feet, modern stride, even the hint of shoes, in an epoch when, according to evolutionary timelines, our ancestors had just begun to stand. The initial response was cautious curiosity, but soon reinterpretation set in. Skepticism grew. Alternative explanations were offered. Erosion patterns, natural wear, misread evidence. Museums displayed the prints as milestones of early bipedalism, but steered clear of discussing their modern characteristics. Access to the prints became limited. Proposals for reanalysis were quietly declined. Researchers who pointed to the anomalies were dismissed or ignored. The footprints remained, visible, documented, but locked inside a narrative that had no space for their contradictions. And yet the impressions remain unaltered. Each step a ghost, each toe a question. What if someone or something with a human gait walked across that ash before humanity as we know it existed? What if modern anatomy has surfaced not once, but multiple times, interrupted by cataclysm, by forgetting, by time's long erosion? The Laetoli footprints offer no definitive answers. They do not demand a radical rewrite of history, but they do require humility. They remind us that even stone can deceive, that timelines are not carved in granite but drawn in chalk, vulnerable to revision. We often define humanity by when we stood, when we thought, when we created. But what if we were walking longer than we knew? What if the line between modern and ancient is not a boundary but a blur? These footprints stretch across more than just volcanic ash. They stretch across our assumptions. Our comfort with linear progress, our belief that we know for certain where we came from. And so, three beings walk across time, silent, barefoot, or not, leaving behind not just prints, but presence. The question they leave is not, who were they? It is, how early did we begin being us? In the quiet hills of South Africa, the earth holds its breath. From deep within ancient rock, older than animals, older than plants, miners have extracted something that should not exist. Metallic spheres, impossibly old, impossibly precise. Smooth, grooved, and symmetrical, they are known as the Klerksdorp Spheres. And they were found in rock dated to 2.8 billion years ago. At that time, Earth was raw, Earth. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere, no multicellular life. The continents were still forming. And yet, these objects waited, encased in stone, as if forgotten by time itself. The spheres vary in size, some just an inch across. Many are made of pyrophyllite or hematite. Some are hollow. Others contain materials that modern analysis has yet to identify. Most remarkably, many of them bear 3 parallel grooves carved with a precision that modern manufacturing struggles to replicate. Their balance, their symmetry, it all suggests intent. But intent from whom? Geologists have tried to explain them as natural formations, concretions formed under intense pressure, but the grooves persist. So do the near-perfect roundness, the uniform density, and the internal structures that don't fit any known geological process. For every attempt to fit them into a natural category, another mystery unfolds. Some spheres spin on their axes when placed on display, seemingly defying gravity. Others resonate with sound. They behave not like accidents, but like components. But components of what? No tools have been found near them. No bones, no settlements, just spheres in the depths of primordial Earth. If they were made, the makers existed long before humanity, long before even the idea of life as we understand it. Most scientists avoid the subject. The stakes are too high. If the spheres are artifacts, they point to a pre-human intelligence so ancient it borders on the unthinkable. If they are natural, they represent geological phenomena unlike anything yet documented. And yet, they are real. They sit in museum cases, labeled ambiguously. Mysterious. Unexplained. The language of quiet dismissal. Not hoaxes, not fakes, just questions no one wants to ask too loudly. Because what if Earth has been host not to one story of intelligence, but many? What if awareness rose before, only to vanish, leaving behind not ruins, but relics so small and strange we overlook them? Perhaps not all intelligence builds towers or cities. Perhaps some leave behind puzzles in stone. The Klerksdorp Spheres do not shout. They do not warn. They only wait. Their very existence whispers that the story of this planet is deeper, older, and stranger than our timelines allow. That beneath the weight of ages, there may lie entire epics of forgotten endeavor, efforts, lives, technologies, vanished without record, remembered only by the stone that once cradled them. And if such epics exist, what does that make us? The latest? Or just another chapter, waiting to be buried in turn? In the shadows of what we call history, some discoveries arrive not as revelations, but as riddles. Scattered across deserts, buried in forgotten soils, and pulled from layers of rock older than humanity's written word, they do not ask to be believed. They ask to be witnessed. 10 artifacts, each one defying the lines we've drawn between past and present, myth and memory. A hammer sealed in ancient stone, a mechanical computer lost at sea, a spark plug hidden inside 500,000 years of geology, jars that once held electricity, sculpted metal in prehistoric strata, figurines from ages before art was supposed to exist, spheres that predate biology itself, prints in volcanic ash, carved stones of impossible knowledge, and alloys formed before the discovery of aluminum. Together, they form a pattern, not of proof but of persistence. Each time the process is the same: discovery, initial excitement, institutional retreat, then disappearance. The artifacts are labeled anomalies. They are filed away, their implications too disruptive to entertain. They remain visible, yet unacknowledged. Present but absent from the narrative. And still they endure. These artifacts do not scream for attention. They whisper. They murmur of chapters lost to fire, to flood, to forgetfulness. They ask, what if the story of human development is not linear but rhythmic? Not a ladder but a spiral, rising and falling across ages, with peaks we have forgotten and valleys we have yet to recognize. We assume that progress is inevitable, that we began in darkness and moved toward light. But what if the light once burned bright, only to be extinguished and buried, awaiting rediscovery? What if civilizations rose with brilliance and precision, only to vanish beneath catastrophe or time's erosion? This is not about aliens or conspiracies. It is about humility, a recognition that our timeline, as we know it, is fragile, that the record we call history is only what survived, not what truly was. That memory fades not only in minds, but in cultures, and that objects, mute, inert, sometimes carry more truth than the stories we've chosen to tell. We may never fully understand these artifacts. Their origins may remain veiled in silence, but that does not make them meaningless. On the contrary, it makes them sacred, reminders that certainty is an illusion and that mystery still walks beside us. In the end, we must ask not what these artifacts are, but what they ask of us. To look closer, to listen deeper, to imagine wider, because the past is not gone. It is buried, waiting, not for proof, but for wonder. And the most dangerous thing we can do is to stop asking questions. So here we are, at the edge of knowing, standing among artifacts that defy not only time, but our very sense of what is possible. A hammer sealed in stone older than trees, a clockwork machine built before clocks, a spark plug nestled in prehistoric rock, batteries buried in forgotten clay, a wedge of aluminum predating modern industry, a sculpted pot beneath layers of geologic time, spheres from an earth still forming, figurines from before art, footprints that walk ahead of our understanding. Stones carved with stories we're not ready to hear. Each of them speaks a language without words, quiet, insistent, unresolved. And we must ask, what does it mean to forget? We often imagine history as complete, a finished puzzle with only a few pieces missing. But perhaps it is more like a shattered mirror, with shards glinting in places we least expect. Some fragments reflect a world we recognize. Others show something unfamiliar, something older, wiser, maybe even more advanced. Our institutions are built to preserve knowledge, yet they sometimes become its gatekeepers. The impulse to protect becomes the instinct to dismiss. Evidence that doesn't fit is not necessarily disproved. It is simply avoided, labeled an outlier, then shelved in shadow. But history is not fragile. It does not break when we ask better questions. In fact, the human story deepens when we dare to hold ambiguity, when we allow contradictions to exist without resolution, when we admit that we are not the peak of progress but part of a cycle, one that rises and falls, forgets and remembers. These artifacts are not definitive proof of lost civilizations, or time travelers, or ancient technologies. They are something more valuable than certainty. They are reminders. Reminders that knowledge is not a straight road, that genius is not bound by time, that human imagination, skill, and curiosity may have surged before and been lost. And if that has happened once, could it happen again? Could we, too, be forgotten? Perhaps the most humbling thought is not that someone came before us with great knowledge, but that we, too, could vanish, leaving only remnants for future minds to puzzle over. A phone fossilized in rock, a city turned to sand, a library burned into silence. Will they wonder who we were? Will they ask what we knew? Or will they, like us, write a story that leaves out the inconvenient and unexplainable? This journey through 10 impossible artifacts is not just about the past. It is about our present willingness to ask, to imagine, and to remember that not everything that matters fits the narratives we inherit. Because in the end, history is not a destination. It is a question, and it is still being written.